Hi there, and welcome to the first episode of Tenant Talks, a new web series from the Center for Ocean Ventures and Entrepreneurship, better known as Cove, where we sit down weekly with a member of the Cove community for an engaging discussion on all things ocean tech. For those that don't know me, my name is Kyle Burton, and I work on the Cove team as the Tenant Engagement Manager. So naturally, I'm excited to host this series and engage with some of the innovative companies that call Cove home as tenants. On today, the first episode of Tenant Talks, I'm joined with Eric Siegel, the Director of Sales and Marketing at RBR. Welcome, Eric, and thank you for being the very first guest to join us on Tenant Talks.
Hi, Kyle. Thanks so much for having me. I'm super excited to be here. I remember a couple months ago, we were talking about how to have the other Cove companies engage with each other, and we talked about having short lunchtime sessions. So now we get to do it, but we can invite the entire world to join. So I think it's even better.
That's great. It is great to keep connected, especially through these times. Let's get right into things. Can you give us a quick one-liner on what RBR does?
Sure. RBR develops sensors, instruments, and systems to measure the blue planet.
Oh, that's awesome. Before we get into the whole spiel about the company, I just want to touch a little bit on your background, Eric, because it's very fascinating. For me personally, just as I was getting involved in the ocean sector, I had the pleasure of getting to know you as you were sailing around the world with your wife and 3 children. And if I remember correctly, Eric, you were using that amazing opportunity to not only sail the seas across the Atlantic, but also teach your children about science and the importance of protecting and understanding the oceans. So remote learning is something you're very familiar with. So can you give us a little bit more background on that whole experience?
Yeah, sure. Actually, Kyle, I think I remember you picked me up in the car when I first landed back in Halifax and didn't have a car or anything. So that was pretty awesome. Yeah, we were living in the UK at the time, and we had the opportunity to fix up an old boat and sail it across the Atlantic with the kids to have a chance to bond with the kids a little bit more, to do some homeschooling, which I'm sure many people are now familiar with the joys and the struggles, but also use it as a way to do a little bit of ocean science and technology to engage the kids, because it's fun to do that, of course. And we got some nice sponsorship, not in money, of course, but for some sensors. So RBR loaned us a CTD, MedOcean in Halifax loaned us some drifting buoys, and another company in Spain, Marine Instruments, loaned us some drifting buoys. So we tied messages in bottles, attached them to the GPS drifting buoys, and threw them out across the ocean as we sailed from Europe over to the Caribbean. So it was a fun project and fun experience for all of us.
Nice. I'm sure that's an experience they'll never forget.
Hope so.
So you mentioned that you were using RBR equipment, but you weren't really with RBR on the RBR team before this adventure, correct?
That's correct. Actually, I did work with RBR for about 1 year, 15 or 16 years ago, but at that time I wasn't working with RBR. That's right.
Nice. Can you share a little bit more about your background before this adventure, and then how you ended up at RBR? It's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been interested in ocean science and ocean technology. I have undergraduate degrees in math and physics and marine science, and a graduate degree in physical oceanography, also engineering and marine architecture. But then for a while, I worked as an operational oceanographer on the West Coast, and then I transitioned when we first moved to Halifax. Actually, we immigrated from the US to Canada and landed in Halifax, and I was working for a Norwegian company called Nortec that makes acoustic sensors to measure currents and waves. And I worked for them for a long time in Halifax, really enjoyed that experience. And while I was there, I got some funding together and started up our own company called Nortec Scientific to develop more instrumentation. And over those time periods, we had some really awesome partnerships. We did some projects with offshore aquaculture to understand loads on the offshore cages. We did some projects with marine renewables, particularly in the Bay of Fundy, with everything going on when FORCE was just started. We put together a really nice partnership between Dalhousie and FORCE to develop this project called the Vectron, which is a big turbulence measurement system in the Bay of Fundy. And we got together a really nice project between Dalhousie and Memorial University to get some ACOA funding and develop some new instrumentation. Actually, I remember this was probably 10 or 15 years ago that NSBI, Nova Scotia Business Inc., wanted to celebrate the ocean science and ocean tech community by chartering the Blue Nose, putting it in at the Halifax waterfront over Canada Day, and invited all the companies that were involved in ocean tech there. And at that point, it was awesome. I mean, we really felt like rock stars in ocean science and ocean technology in Halifax.
Nice. That's really exciting. You have a kind of a truly international experience that you're able to bring here to Halifax. Can you give me a little bit more background on that experience being kind of a key driver for you ending up at RBR, and why you're excited to be there.
Yeah, so I'd known the folks at RBR, Greg Johnson particularly, the president, for a long time. As I said, I did work there for a while about 15 years ago, and I knew they're doing really great things in ocean science, really great things in technology, and it was really fun to return back to Canada after having living in the States and in the UK for a number of years, to return back, contribute to a great Canadian company that's really doing interesting things in ocean science and technology. So it just felt like a good fit all around.
Nice. Maybe we can now get into a little bit more about what RBR does and dig a little bit more into measuring the blue planet, as you say.
Sure. I prepared a little presentation that shows some of the fun things we've been doing, both at Cove and domestically and internationally. So let me just get that shared here. Okay, let me remember how to use Zoom. Okay, share screen. Here we go. Okay, 1 second here. And here we go. Yeah, so actually moving into Cove was very interesting because I was living in the UK at the time when Jim and other folks were starting up the Cove and learning about the Cove facility. And I just thought it was an awesome partnership all around. And I really wanted to be a part of it. But living and working in the UK at the time, I just wasn't sure how I would be able to contribute or be a part of it. And then as soon as we moved back to Halifax, I wanted to get a tour. So I got a chance to go through the Cove facility before it was even finished. I think Jim and some folks took me for a tour. We had to wear hard hats, we had to wear boots. The floors weren't even labeled. Here I was showing what the third floor looks like before any carpeting or any walls. And it was just fun to see it come along. We got to be at Cove on their opening day. This is when the fireboat came and gave a nice parade. And then we got to finish out the office, which is pretty cool. So our office in Halifax at Cove is mostly sales and business development people. We have a good time here. We're paddleboarding on one of the RBR stand-up paddleboards in the middle of winter. But what we like about this facility for us at Cove, even for sales and business development people, is that it links us to other ocean tech and ocean science people, particularly if it's a small office. It's really good for recruiting. It means you don't have to tell people they have to work in a home office. It means that they get to have a network of people, not only people within our company at RBR, but if a couple of us are traveling and it's just one person being in the office, they get to have the community of all the other people at Cove to eat lunch with, to see each other at the coffee machine, and to see each other as they come and go. So it just gives a little bit more of a community, especially for small companies. And of course, the word collision that people use when we all bump into each other and share information is very valuable. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, you told me about a project for Canadian-German partnerships that I wasn't aware of, and we have submitted a proposal to that. So that was really useful. And of course, you've established Cove as a really great destination for frequent speakers, for frequent meetings and events. And it's really convenient for us just to walk downstairs or walk across the parking lot to go to those kinds of events. And then something that, related to that is that you bring awesome people to us. So here's our office giving a presentation to a couple dozen of the global ocean leaders that happened to be in Halifax for the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science planning meeting that was in Halifax. And you brought them all to Cove, brought them all to our office, and I got a chance to tell them what they're doing. And that's really a valuable opportunity for us, never having to leave our building to do that. And of course, no one can complain about the view, so that's pretty awesome. But let's talk about what RBR does. Yes, we measure the blue planet, and as you might have mentioned, we've been around for about 45 years, based in Ottawa, originally 45 years ago, getting some cool engineering and development contracts from the Canadian government. And about 20 years ago, the company pivoted to making a little bit more environmental focused measurements with some very accurate and low power temperature sensors. And then about 10 years ago, RBR pivoted more firmly towards ocean science, ocean technology, and really started expanding the product line to do a whole bunch of things. So we measure temperature, water pressure, salinity, dissolved oxygen, light, a whole bunch of other water quality parameters, and then some other physical things like tides and waves. If you think about ocean sensors as being what the doctor uses to measure people when you go in to see them, the doctor will measure your heart, your pulse, your breathing. Those are core variables that the doctors will measure regardless of why you go in there. And these kinds of measurements of temperature, pressure, salinity, those are core measurements that anyone doing science or research or development in the ocean will want to measure. So we get to be a part of a lot of different projects because of that. RBR makes the highest accuracy and highest stability sensors, and particularly used for ocean science when people want to look at things like changing climate, or when they really need to publish their work and have trusted data quality. We don't make the lowest cost sensors. In fact, they're generally pretty expensive. The joke that I make is if I put a couple of these sensors in my car, it doubles the value of my car. But I don't have a very expensive car, so maybe that's not saying much. But generally, people select RBR because of the really high data quality, the intuitive ease of use, such as the way we can twist our sensors to activate them. The sensors have Wi-Fi, so you can communicate to your iPhone or your tablet, and very low power. So we are an international company. We have our headquarters in Ottawa and our regional office at Cove, but we also have an office in Seattle, in France, in Qingdao, China, and in Australia. And we try to staff these offices with really outstanding people, really technical people, so they can be very responsive and partner and get really close to the customers. It's been very successful for us. I think it's been very successful for the companies and our customers, and we really enjoy having that global reach and global vision. So we've broken our product line into 4 main categories. So sensors, those are things to actually measure things in the water. Loggers will combine sensors together to provide power and to log the data. Systems help integrate networks of loggers together and communicate the data. And then we have an OEM product line where we sell our products to people that develop them into their own sensors and their own products. And you may be using some of those without even knowing that they're necessarily RBR products. So locally, we're involved, of course, in Nova Scotia. We've got lots of projects going on with Department of Fisheries and Oceans, with the universities, and with a lot of consulting and engineering companies for renewable and offshore oil and gas projects. And we're really pleased to be industry partners on a couple of the Ocean Frontier Institute programs. This is a photo provided by Eric Oliver on a project that we're involved with to do community-based monitoring in Labrador. So this person's deploying one of our CTDs through a hole in the ice to measure the properties in the ocean below the ice. And another project we're partnering on with Zoe Finkel and her group to look at the Northwest Atlantic biological carbon pump. So we're going to be providing a bunch of sensors to help them understand the Northwest Atlantic. And of course, finally, we're interested and we are partnering with a couple researchers on some large CFI projects. So that's what we're doing locally in Nova Scotia. Nationally, of course, we're involved all over the country. This is a cool photo from some customers at University of Toronto. They're standing above a frozen lake. They deploy a bunch of our temperature sensors in the lake to look at how the lake cycles in temperature as the sun comes up and summer begins. I'm getting a call. I just want to make sure it's not you telling me I'm doing something silly. No, okay, sounds good. And here, University of Toronto, I guess you would tell me, yeah. Here, University of Toronto chose our equipment because of the very high accuracy. Very small changes in temperature through the lake will drive the overturning circulation, which will affect how oxygen gets cycled. And they need that kind of accuracy to even resolve the very small currents underneath the ice. This is a cool program with Carleton University, collaborating with University of California at Davis to look at some flow beneath the ice up in the Arctic. Here they're deploying a number of our sensors through holes in the ice to see how the rivers of water streaming and melting under the glaciers are eroding the ice, affecting how much ice and how much glaciers are up there. And this is a cool program in British Columbia. The Nature Trust of BC got some funding to partner with community scientists to measure the water properties in the coastal estuaries and even up some of the rivers to help them manage salmon populations a little bit better. And so we've helped them to develop some customized instrumentation that the scientists and the citizens can use, can carry easily. We've given them some training. We've helped them with Wi-Fi and how to manage the data, and that's been a fun partnership. But of course, we're active all over the world. So here are some, this is an example of a water quality monitoring station in Lake Tahoe. This is a photo of a bunch of temperature sensors used to measure mixing as the tide comes up and goes down in a mangrove estuary in Vietnam. This is a project in partnership with University of Waikato in New Zealand. Here, the US Navy deploys hundreds of our temperature and pressure loggers to look at coastal dynamics. particularly how the internal waves come in California that drive some of the currents, that drive some of the mixing, and also the surface conditions. And we've got a nice project going on with Woods Hole, the US Navy, and NOAA to help deploy a bunch of sensors out of airplanes that land just in front of hurricanes and then move up and down in the water column below the hurricanes, understanding how heat affects hurricanes and how hurricanes affect the heat in the water. This is pretty interesting because while hurricane forecast in terms of direction has become much more accurate over the past 20 or 30 years, hurricane forecast for intensity hasn't increased or hasn't improved that much over the last couple decades. And so understanding the heat in the ocean and how much heat's available is really important to understand the hurricane intensity. We're also making some cool systems to help measure tsunamis and give some warning for tsunami detection systems and tsunami warning systems. This is deployment in Canada, and Oceans Network Canada, but we're working on some projects in Singapore as well to help them with their tsunami monitoring system. We're on a bunch of surface vehicles. These are some small sensors that people use on autonomous surface vehicles. This is a project that was Fiamma and Clark when they were at Hui, and now they've moved on both to Scripps and DFO. This is a cool project. And on ocean gliders. So you'll know that ocean gliders are becoming very useful, very ubiquitous in ocean monitoring. They're autonomous systems that essentially fly underwater. And our sensors have been integrated on just about all the glider platforms. The scientists and the system integrators are choosing RBR because we have very low power, which extends their missions. Our sensors are quiet, so that improves anytime they're making acoustic measurements on gliders, we can improve their projects. And we can integrate many other sensors. So it's kind of a nice package for them to use all around. But I think what I'm really most proud of is some of the ways that RBR is trying to give back to the community and show our appreciation. And we're trying to do that by developing partnerships to support science and scientists. So we've partnered with a Canadian organization called Students on Ice over the past couple of years, where we loan them some sensors that they use to teach ocean science and the importance of making measurements to the students that they take sometimes from Greenland across through the Northwest Passage and sometimes just through the Canadian Northwest Passage. So this is a nice photo of that. And finally, we've started last year this thing called the RBR 2020 cohort program, where we accepted proposals from really brilliant early career ocean scientists and engineers from all over the world. We selected 16 really promising early career ocean scientists, and we're helping them. We're helping them to be better and to enable more innovations and to be more successful. So we're loaning them some equipment to help do some demonstration projects to facilitate larger projects that they'll be able to develop. We're helping them with some technology development. So if they want to come to RBR and help modify a sensor or do a special calibration or just do something slightly customized to really enable their research, we're going to partner with them on that. We're helping sponsor them to go to international conferences to present their work. And we're trying to give them some mentorship, both in science communication and professional development. So we had a panel of science professionals at the Ocean Science meeting that was in February this couple months ago to help give some professional development mentorship. And last week, we actually had the first of 3 science communication workshops where science communication professionals were able to help coach these 16 people, but we actually opened it up to the whole world. So we had scientists from all over the world participate in those science communication workshops. And there'll be 2 more of those in the coming months. And of course, we want everyone else to join. So that's a kind of quick summary of what we're doing at RBR and what we're proud of.
That's awesome, Eric. The lots of interesting things going on for sure, not just here at Cove, but all over the world. So really impressive. Just recently, last year, RBR was named one of the fastest growing companies in Canada. Even after 50 years in business, the company is still finding ways to do business innovatively. Tongue twister. Innovatively, that's right. To do innovation across sectors that are increasingly relying on ocean technologies. What kind of trends do you see in industries that are particularly interesting to RBR?
Yeah, of course, there are lots of trends going on, but the ones that at least I see that are particularly interesting for RBR is both work in the polar regions and a concept about autonomy, but also how that affects price. So in terms of polar regions, we know there's a lot of interest up there, both in the Arctic and Antarctic. Some really interesting work's going to be going on there in the next decade or more. First, we know it's like the canary. It's an area that's changing very rapidly as the climate's changing. It's an area that we need to study, to monitor, and to understand. But from an engineering point of view, it's in some ways it's similar like the deep sea. It's really hard to do work up there. It's hard to get there. Once you're there, the conditions are really challenging. Anytime you're working below the freezing point with any type of liquid, of course, that's a problem. Keeping sensors calibrated. I know for anything that uses compasses, even measuring where north is when you're at the North Pole is a really challenging thing. So we see lots of work going on in the Arctic for science work, for resource work, for domestic claims work. I think it's going to be a really interesting place to work. And so we're excited to support projects and try to develop more technology that will be useful in the Arctic. The second area I see is about autonomy. Now, there's a lot of work about autonomous systems, and I think overall we know that's going to be a big thing in the future. But the way that I see it is really partnering with a request that we get sometimes, which is, can you provide lower accuracy sensors at a lower cost? And at RBR, our whole ethos is about the highest accuracy sensors. So it's not interesting for us to make lower accuracy sensors at a lower cost, but we do want to drive the cost down. And we see driving the cost down, the ability to drive the cost down by increasing volume. And in ocean science and technology, if you sell things by the dozen, usually people are talking about high volume because these are usually high value things, not high volume. But we're trying to work with organizations to think of new paradigms and develop autonomous systems that can be lower cost, lower operational requirements, and can be distributed really widely. So, for example, instead of deploying a couple of gliders every year, what if you deployed 300 low-cost ones for particular projects? And what if instead of sending a couple of CTDs around Greenland, what if you flew around Greenland and in one afternoon deployed 500 sensors, like autonomous systems that are lower cost, but giving really great accuracy? So we sort of see autonomy partnering with higher volume to drive the cost down to enable all sorts of new projects.
Awesome. Those are great points. And if you look maybe 10 years into the future, where do you see RBR and the ocean technology sector at?
Yeah. So I think we all can agree that the oceans have been in the spotlight for a while and are now getting a much brighter spotlight, which probably everyone on this call can really appreciate. For example, the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, I think, is a really nice way to show that it's not just something we think at Cove or we think in Canada, but it's globally embraced. So I think that's the kind of thing that will help rise all tides. And we want RBR to continue to be one of the real leaders in developing sensors, systems, and instrumentation to support ocean science and ocean technology.
Interesting, for sure. And I'm sure that spotlight from the UN Decade of the Oceans for Ocean Science is very important in kind of your mantra going forward.
Yes, I think so. It helps us believe that we are on the right path.
Nice. That's awesome. We did have a question come in earlier from someone asking how long it took you to sail across the Atlantic.
Well, we were on the boat for about a year, homeschooling, in an area that's probably about the size of most people's closet in their house. And the longest trip on that passage was between Cape Verde, just off Africa, and Barbados in the Caribbean, and that was 14 days. Before kids, we actually did a trip, just my wife and I, across the Pacific, and that was 30 days between Mexico and French Polynesia. So 14 days felt very quick.
The Cape Verde to Barbados, I think that's when you released the Mid-Ocean Drifter, correct?
Yeah. Yes, we might have released that one between Canary Islands and Cape Verde. I can't remember, but yeah, that one had a big drogue, so it went, which was cool, and it went very, very slowly. The other ones were just floating on the surface, drifting behind us, and they followed our track of the sailboat so closely. My dad was emailing me saying, "I think you forgot to untie it from behind the boat because it was just following the track so carefully." And one of those actually drifted within 4 miles of Barbados itself. So after 2,000 miles across the ocean, it drifted within 4 miles of where we actually sailed. Pretty impressive.
Well, that's impressive. So I don't see any other questions coming in. So let's jump into kind of the fun stuff, the lightning. this is a fun way to get to know you a little bit better, and leave things on a fun note. So if you had to eat one meal for the rest of your life, what would that be?
We talk about this at home sometimes with the kids. I couldn't narrow it down to a meal. I'm sorry. I need a little bit more variety in that. But I really enjoy Japanese food, and I think about it as if I had to live on only one sort of ethnicity of food for the rest of my life, I think it would be Japanese food. It's the spice, the variety, the vegetables, the fish, the meat, the flavors, all reasonably healthy. Felt like a good fit for me.
Awesome. And you've obviously done an extensive amount of travel. Where's the most interesting place you've ever been?
When we sailed across the Pacific Ocean before kids, we stopped at an island nation called Niue. It's a couple 100 miles east of New Zealand, and east of Tonga and north of New Zealand. It's only about 10 miles across, and it's very flat. It's like a pancake. And hundreds of thousands of years ago, it used to be the sea floor. And then some volcanic activity thrust it up to the surface. And now it's like a big pancake, round and 10 miles across. And you can hike through the woods there, but you're actually hiking through old coral reefs. And so you're walking in sand. The corals are among you, as well as trees. And it was a pretty cool environment to be in.
Wow, that's awesome. It's like the opposite of Atlantis.
Yes, that's a very dry opposite of Atlantis. That's right.
We do have a question coming in through Zoom chat, actually. Does RBR do current tidal stream measurements?
No, we don't measure current velocity directly. So we do measure pressure, and we can measure pressure very accurately. So some people can use our sensors to measure water level and water level slope, and from that derive speed, but we don't make any direct measurements of speed or direction.
Fantastic. Eric, I think we're getting close to time for this episode, but I just want to thank you very much for joining Tenant Talks and being the first guest.
Thank you. It's been awesome. I've enjoyed being the guest, and I look forward to seeing and learning from the rest of the speakers in future weeks as well.
Awesome. Thanks so much also for being such a great member of the Cove community. And I'm just going to share my screen here, chat about who's joining next week. So next week, you can join us at noon on Tuesday, May 19th, as we chat with Kes Morton. She's the president and CEO of Pisces RPM, and I'm very excited to chat with her, just as I am with Eric today. So thank you very much for everyone who joined today, and you can watch on YouTube and join on the Cove website at coveocean.com/events to register for future episodes. Thanks very much.